Om Jnanatimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapad Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, just a few more straddlers coming in. So we're going to be resuming today chapter 9, continuing on the second half of the chapter. And before we begin though, I would like to bring back something that we did back in module 1 and just do a quick revision of what we did last week. But just seeing from everyone else, I'm curious which points we've retained and how we've felt the flow of the Gita so far. So who can tell me what we've covered so far in chapter 9?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
So this chapter is like most confidential knowledge. So we started with how this is most confidential, because in the previous chapters, like in chapter 2 and chapter 3, Krishna explained the confidential knowledge about the soul. And then in the chapter 7, he explained more confidential knowledge of his his nature and how to attain him. But now the process is being explained, which is the most confidential knowledge, which is the complete devotional service, pure bhakti. So that is the theme. And then in this context, we also discussed about the Mahatmas, like who are the actual great people and what are their nature and their characteristics.
Yeah. So thank you very much. So this is the nature that we're describing, right? We're discussing the nature of Shuddha Bhakti. We're discussing the nature of pure devotion. This is the most confidential knowledge and it is the most intimate knowledge. And why is it the most confidential knowledge? It's most confidential for several reasons, as we've already discussed, right? Firstly, it is the most confidential knowledge because it's the most valuable knowledge, right? It is the most confidential because that which is valuable is kept hidden away. Right? We do not, there's a famous saying, we do not throw pearls before swine, right? Swine is a way of saying pigs. And so when you're throwing out to feed the pigs, they say you don't throw the pearls out for the pigs to eat, right? Instead, you keep the pearls hidden away. So this is the most confidential knowledge, firstly, because it is so valuable, but also it is the most confidential knowledge because it is very powerful knowledge. Right? The knowledge of bhakti, the knowledge of pure devotion, as we will continue to discuss in this chapter, is very, very estimable. It's very valuable. It's very powerful, right? And does anyone know, we've already discussed this point, so I'm just again revising central themes and concepts. Does anyone remember why bhakti is so powerful? Why would this be kept as such a confidential and powerful knowledge? What would we say? What is the strength? What is the power that bhakti can give?
It gives, like, Krishna can be controlled, and so Krishna doesn't give that easily.
Yeah, exactly, right? This is the means by which Krishna is conquered, right? Krishna himself is conquered by this knowledge. And so people don't give away the means by which they can be conquered very easily, right? We think about something as simple as nuclear missiles, right? People are often talking about war and these sort of things. We think of nuclear missiles, which can so easily decimate whole countries. And if you see how secretly these missiles are kept, right? You'll have all these secret codes and all of these different means to access it and all. I remember there's also that, and if it doesn't turn out successfully, we can see the negative effects that these sort of things can have. And yet, how much more powerful then is bhakti, right? What can a nuclear missile do? It can maybe take out a country or two, right? Depending on how they get launched, they can take out every country. But to conquer the Supreme Lord, that is something that's much, much more secretive, right? I don't know any of us who would know how to be able to launch one of those missiles, who would be able to know the passcodes and all, right? We wouldn't even know the locations of where those missiles are stored, right? And yet this knowledge is infinitely more confidential than that. And why is that? It is because it is this knowledge that allows one to conquer the Supreme Lord. I've said this point before, but I always like to repeat it. Bhakti Rasayan Sagar Maharaj, he was once making the point that Mayavadis, they lack ambition, right? Because Mayavadis simply want to become equal with the Lord, but the devotees want to become greater than the Lord, right? Because the devotees can conquer the Lord. So for all of these reasons, this is a very, very confidential knowledge. And as Mataji very nicely explained, we got up to the description of the pure devotee, the Mahatma, right? In text 14. Always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing before me, those great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. So let's then continue on with text 15. Maybe we can have Rohan Prabhu will say the English. I'll recite the Sanskrit. Jnana yagyena chapyanye yajanto mamupasate ekatvena prithaktvena bahudha vishvato mukham.
Others who engage in sacrifice by the cultivation of knowledge worship the Supreme Lord as the one without a second, as diverse in many and in the universal form.
Yes. Okay. So here we have, as I was saying last week, we have heard how the people who perfectly approach Krishna approach him, right? Those people who in humility approach him properly, those people who in bhakti approach him properly, right? We have heard about them, but now we are hearing about the other categories of people. We are hearing about a differing type of personality, right? Can anyone tell me, can anyone see in the text, how many different people are we seeing here? 3, yes. There are 3 types. There are 3 types of people who worship Krishna in a slightly different way, right? They are engaged in another type of worship, okay? These are considered 3 categories of what? When we read these characteristics, what do we think of? Are we thinking of a Nishkama Karma Yogi? Or rather, are we thinking of a Sakama Karma Yogi, right? No, these are generally considered to be types of Gyanis, right? So these are types of Gyanis who do engage in worship of Krishna, but they are not on the highest platform. Who is the first one mentioned here?
The one who worships himself as the Supreme Lord.
Yeah. Yes. The one who worships the Lord in oneness, right? So this is the Ekatvena, right? So these people we will discuss much later on in chapter 12. Okay, chapter 12 will be the point upon which we discuss them furthermore, right? But the other 2 types we are about to discuss, right? So they will compose the remainder, or rather the next few texts, okay? The next 15 texts or so, we'll be discussing these other two types. So this text, as we can see, Prabhupada has very nicely translated this. Others, we can see is a rather large shift from what we've heard before, okay? So at this point, at text 15, we are transitioning into a different type of discussion. And what is that? Again, this is primarily a discussion of the other two. The Ekatvena, right? He who worships himself as one with the Supreme Lord, as Srila Prabhupada has mentioned. Again, we will discuss in chapter 12. Chapter 12 is very famous for a few reasons. One, it's the shortest chapter. Second, it's called the Bhakti Yoga, right? So it's a win-win for us, right? You can't lose, right? You can't lose at chapter 12. But anyways, the rest of this section, hopefully this will compose the remainder of our first hour together, depending how quickly we'll go through this. We'll be discussing the second and the third type of person, okay? And who are they mentioned? And as you might already see, they're mentioned in the purport. But if someone will be able to, whoever answers next, try and see which Sanskrit word in the shloka is referring to them. And then maybe Mrugant Prabhu can note them. So the first one is the one who worships himself as one with the Supreme Lord. That's Ekatvena. If you have your Gitas in front of you, please identify the second type of person and the Sanskrit word that's used to identify them. Yes, very nice. Okay, so the next one is Prithakvena. And which category is Prithakvena? Can anyone identify from the word for word? Katyani Mataji and Srinivas Prabhu have very nicely given us the word. Somebody look into the word for word and identify what this is referring to. I'll start calling people out if we don't have another volunteer.
In duality?
Yes, in duality or in diversity, right? In a multiplicity, right? In many forms, right? Of all the demigods, right? And so they think of the Supreme, they imagine a favorite demigod as the Supreme Lord, okay? And then we have the last one, the third one. Who can tell me what is the Sanskrit for the third one? I'll start calling people out, okay. When I did my teacher's training course, they told me not to call people out, but I just didn't tell my teacher's training course teacher. Shri Mataji. The third category.
So the Sanskrit?
Yeah, the Sanskrit and the English, if you can as well.
Sure. So the one who like accepts the universal form.
Yes.
And the Sanskrit is Vishvatamukham.
Yeah, let's see. Yep, Jai, very good. Okay, so here we have these three different categories of different varieties of individuals, right? And so in a sense, we've sort of abandoned our slight descriptions, our brief conversations regarding pure bhakti. And again, we're discussing alloyed bhakti, right? We're discussing a mixed form. However, as I've said before, this is the most confidential knowledge. And therefore, when we are discussing these almost in a sense to contrast them against pure devotees, right? In the previous chapters, when we've been discussing pure devotion, we've been discussing it almost to contrast it against mixed devotion. Now this is the inverse. Again, this 9th chapter is very, very much focused upon these things. So to begin with, we will discuss the third category, those who witness the Supreme Lord in the universal form. But before we fully get to that, I just want to ask, what can we guess? Of these, who is the highest and who is the lowest? Is the third the highest? Is the third the lowest? Is the first the highest, or is the first the lowest?
I think the third category is the highest, Professor.
Yes, you would not be wrong, right? And then if the third is the highest, then who's the lowest? Is it the second or the first?
Definitely first one.
Yes, definitely the first one. We are not fond of impersonalism or Mayavad, okay? So yes, this is the first one. Krishna, he is listing these in order from worst rather to best, okay? So these are all the different varieties of people. In fact, in one sense, we've already discussed the first one, right? We've already discussed him, even though in chapter 12, there'll be a broader elaboration, there'll be a stronger one. We've already really discussed him in texts 11 and 12. Can anyone remember them? Those were the last points before we wrapped up last week, before we discussed the pure devotee. We discussed somebody who's a little bit impure. Can anyone remember text 11 to 12? If anyone has their Gita with them, maybe we can have Mrunal Mataji. Do you have your Gita with you?
Yes, Guruji.
Could you read out the English for texts 11 and 12?
Yeah. For 11, forced to ride me when I descend in the human form, they do not know my transcendental nature as the supreme Lord of all that be. Number 12, those who are thus bewildered are attracted by demoniac and atheistic views. In that deluded condition, their hopes for liberation, their fruitive activities, and the culture of knowledge are all defeated.
Jai. So what do we hear here? We've heard already something of a discussion of Eka Vena. Now, before we move on, I want to make one final point. The Ena ending, we might remember from, again, our memory shlokas. Also, Rohan Prabhu reminded me to tell everyone that with your shlokas, you should remember them, okay? So don't memorize your module 1 ones and then forget them, because at the end of the whole course, you're expected to know them all, okay? And we'll do a quick, not a full quiz of all of them, but we'll do like a random splattering of them, okay? I just remembered then because I was discussing shlokas, okay? So please don't forget your module 1 shlokas, okay? Even if we weren't having the test, please don't forget your module 1 shlokas. You've learned them for a reason, okay? But definitely, so you don't feel shocked when I tell you, when I test you at the end of this course about them. But we might remember a certain text 34, Tadvidhi pranipatena. How does it go then? Yeah, somebody started and then stopped.
I thought you were asking Rohan Prabhu.
No. I meant Rohan Prabhu reminded me to tell everyone.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Adviti pranipatena pariprasnena sevaya.
Yes. Okay.
Jnanam jnanina tattvadesina.
Jai. So what we found there was Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya, right? We find this again, the enas, right? Ekatvena, pritaktvena, right? Ena in Sanskrit tends to mean the instrumental, okay? I won't get too much into the grammar, but it means the means by which something is done, right? So if we go back to the text, if we go into text 15, what do we find? What are they all doing? They are all worshipping the Lord, but these are the different ways that they are doing it. So in a way, we still consider all of these to be worshipping the Lord, okay? They are just doing it in different ways. They have qualified it in different ways, right? So these represent different ways of performing this worship. And again, therefore, we can consider them in some sense to be rather relevant to this most confidential knowledge. Again, it is not pure. It is not on the most highest elevated platform, but in some sense, it is there. Okay, then. Having said that, we're going to go quickly through the next few texts, because the next few texts, what do they discuss? They discuss worshipping Krishna in his universal form, okay? Because someone might wonder, how do we worship the Supreme Lord in his universal form? How do people do this, okay? So maybe we can have Nitai Prabhu can say the English after I've said the Sanskrit for text 16. Aham kratur aham yagyaha svadhaham aham ausadham mantroham aham evajyam aham agniraham hutam.
But it is I who am the ritual, I the sacrifice, the offering to the ancestors, the healing herb, the transcendental chant. I am the butter and the fire and the offering.
Yes. So here we have, again, Krishna is beginning to discuss his relationship with the world in terms of his relationship to the universal form, right? Srila Prabhupada clarifies, and all of our acharyas do in their own way, that this is a meditation on the Lord, because again, what is the relationship between the Lord and this world? What is our philosophy? What is the name of our philosophy? I'll give you a hint. It begins with a, and it rhymes with Chintya Bheda Bheda.
Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva.
Jai, Jai, Jai. Thank you. So this is our philosophy. And what does it mean? Achintya Bheda Bheda. What does this mean? It means the Lord is simultaneously what? He is different.
Simultaneously one and different.
Yes, right? So when somebody asks, is the Supreme Lord different to this world, or is he one with this world? The answer is yes. Okay. So this is how we understand these things, right? And so Srila Prabhupada, he clarifies that when one meditates upon this universal form, in one sense, they are meditating on Krishna, right? Because all of this material manifestation is Krishna, right? In another sense, it is not all Krishna, right? This is the complex nature. Later on, when you get deeper into your Bhakti Vaibhav career, maybe even your Bhakti Sarvabhaum career, you'll find that the universal form is actually a very complex topic, right? So this is a very simple understanding. It gets a whole lot more complex. In Bhagavatam, you'll find descriptions that Brahma is the soul of the universal form and stuff like this. But for our purposes, and for the purposes of understanding the Bhagavad-gītā, we are taking here this as our delineation of the universal form. This will be our first real strong encounter with the universal form. And then in chapter 11, very famously, we're going to hear a whole lot more about the universal form. Okay, so having heard this, we'll continue on with the descriptions. Ragang, it's all right, you can keep writing because there won't be too many notes for the remaining texts. So
Sir,
we
can
had.
you just confirm that this is correct?
Sorry?
Can you just confirm if this is correct?
Yes, it's an indirect form of meditation on Krishna, right? It's indirect because, of course, it's not directly Shyamasundar. There's a purport, I think, in text 19, which is the end of the universal form description, where Srila Prabhupada has this wonderful line. Let me find it. And then we'll come back to text 17. Text 19. Yeah, so Srila Prabhupada, he says, since Krishna is both matter and spirit, the gigantic universal form comprising all material manifestations is also Krishna. And his pastimes in Vrindavan is two-handed Shyamsundar, playing on a flute, are those of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, so we can see from here, Srila Prabhupada, he's drawing out this distinction, right? All material manifestations are Krishna, and therefore, in a sense, it is an indirect meditation. However, the direct form of Krishna consciousness and the pure one is to meditate on Shyamsundar playing his beautiful flute, right? So meditation on the universal form is a meditation on a form of Krishna, but it is a transitory and it is a temporary one. We'll discuss this later on, but Prabhupada, he does mention this, right? That the distinction is that the universal form is a temporary form of the Lord. Okay. So then we'll continue on with the next few lines. They are just illustrating this point furthermore, but nevertheless, nectarian. Let's see, maybe we can have Tanya Mataji can say the English of text 17. Pittaham masya jagato matadhata pitamaha vedyam pavitram onkara riksama yajurevacha.
But it is I who am the ritual, I the sacrifice, the offering to the ancestors, the healing herb, the transcendental chant. I am the butter and the fire and the offering.
Jai. Okay. So again, we are hearing more details about Krishna. Krishna is just listing stuff, right? So we can talk about this more and more, but in general, this is the basic principle. Interestingly enough, of the Vedas, can anyone notice anything interesting about the Vedas that are listed?
There's only 3 of them.
Sorry, there's only 3 of them. Oh, did Mataji say the wrong line? The wrong translation?
No,
I
there's only
just said
3
the one that's on the screen.
Oh no, yeah, that's the wrong one. Yeah, you said the wrong one then.
Oh, I'm happy to say.
Yeah.
Can you bring up the right, because my Bhagavad, I'm trying to find it in the house and it's just
Oh, okay. Mrugang Prabhu has a right one up. So this one right now.
this one.
Yeah.
Okay. I am the father of this universe, the mother, the support, and the grandsire. I'm the object of knowledge, the purifier, and the syllable Om. I am also Rig, the Sama, and the Yajurvedas.
Jai. So we find here, again, what is the question I was asking is, what do we find something interesting about the Vedas that are listed here?
Yeah, what Mrugang said, there are only 3.
There's only 3, exactly, right? So does anyone, I've heard a few things, right? I've heard a few things about why the Atharva Veda is missing. I've never, how do I put it? All of them seem a little, how do I put it? There's mental speculation and then there's philosophical speculation, okay? Philosophical speculation is when there's no clear answer, and so you try and figure out the best. Mental speculation is when you say Krishna is playing an electric guitar in the spiritual world, right? It's just you're making things up. So there's room for both, right? The philosophical speculation that makes most sense to me is the Atharva Veda. In one sense, it's a little bit magical. It's a bit, it's almost like, it almost is a bit like magic. Some of the Samhitas and all that are described in it, right? So in general, the other 3 were considered more respectable. I heard that from Hridayananda Das Goswami. But again, I've heard lots of different explanations. But yeah, none of them, to my memory, were too strong. I'll do a little research on it a little later on. But yeah, just to note, it is something that people note, why Krishna is only mentioning 3 Vedas. Of course, as we know, originally, how many Vedas were there? Are there? Who can tell me? The original Vedas, how many are there?
1. There was 1. There was the 4
There was 1.
Bija verses.
Yes, so there was 1 Veda and it all got split into these ones. So in one sense, Krishna doesn't even need to mention 4. So we can also think about it that way, right? In one sense, there only was 1 Veda. And later on, because of Kali Yuga memories, it had to be split up into multiple pieces. Okay, then let's go on to text 18. These ones can go very quickly. Who should we have next? Let's have Sevamrita Mataji. Can say the English of text 18. Gatir Bharta Prabhu Shakshi Nivasa Sharanam Suhrit Prabhava Pralayasthanam Nidhanam Bijam Avyayam.
I'm the goal, the sustainer, the master, the witness, the abode, the refuge, and the most dear friend. I'm the creation and annihilation, the basis of everything, the resting place, and the eternal seed.
Jai. So again, we have Krishna. He's continuing on his descriptions. I'm not going to comment too much more about those unless anyone has any questions about them. I think we can just go ahead to text 19. Text 19, we can have Nitai Prabhu say the English. Tapyam aham varsham nigrhanyam utsrijami cha amritam chaiva mrityuscha sadasachaham Arjuna.
O Arjuna, I give heat, and I withhold and send forth the rain. I am immortality, and I am also death personified. Both spirit and matter are in me.
Jai. So we find here Krishna, at this point, he really he's at the beginning, in one sense, he's almost being rather pragmatic, right? Or not pragmatic, a little down to earth. Oh, Rohan Prabhu, I'll answer the question in a second. So he's almost starting with rather earthy things, right? Yagyas, right? Sacrifices, healing herbs, right? Transcendental chants. Then it starts to get a little bit more abstract, right? The goal, the sustainer, the witness, the abode, right? The giver of heat, right? Immortality and death, right? So as you can see, there's a sort of growth in abstraction. And ultimately, Krishna comes to his absolute point, which is what? Sat and Asat, they are in me, right? That which is matter and which is spirit, it is all within me, right? So Krishna, he begins with very earthy descriptions of this universal form, and then he comes down to the very abstract principles which underlie the universal form, which underlie our reality, and which can be meditated upon in order to perceive this universal form, right? And of course, as I already mentioned, I jumped ahead because of the question. Srila Prabhupada in his purport very nicely draws out this point in order to explain the means by which we can contrast meditations upon the Supreme Lord. Rohan Prabhu, what led to the Vedas? What led to the Vedas to be divided was because of Kali Yuga memories. They needed to be divided so that they could be memorized more properly. So there was Vyasadeva had different disciples, and he gave each one of the Vedas to his different disciples to memorize and to pass down. That's why still to today, right? If you go to very Vedic parts of India, you'll see, right, like Brahmins who are continuing on this tradition, and they memorize all of the Vedas. That's why you'll see sometimes you'll see some Indian-bodied individuals, and they'll have last names like Trivedi and Chaturvedi, right? And that's because somewhere in their ancestry, they had an ancestor who had memorized a certain amount of Vedas. If you ask the average person with that last name, they're lucky if they know one shloka of the Bhagavad-gītā these days, unfortunately. It's a bit like Prabhupada makes a comment about how there are many people with the last name Goswami, right? And how many people do we know with the last name Goswami who drink alcohol and eat meat, right? So it's the same sort of thing. I don't know how many Trivedis and Chaturvedis know much of the Vedas at all, right? But yeah, so that's how the tradition went. Yes, please, Mrigang Prabhu, please.
Thank you. Whenever the time comes.
No, go now.
Okay.
It's always the right time.
Traividyamam somapaputa papa yajnairištva svargatim prarthayante te punyamasadya surendra lokam ashnanti divyam divideva bhogan.
Jai. I'm happy you did that because I didn't know what meter it was in. So I would have really struggled. Okay. So yes, as Nitai Prabhu said, very big flex. Let's have Shrikanta Sena Prabhu. Would you like to read out the translation?
Prabhu, I can't, sorry.
Okay, that's all right. I'll let's have then Shivam Prabhu. Would you like to read out the translation?
Yep. Those who study the Vedas and drink the Soma juice, seeking the heavenly planets, worship me indirectly. Purified or sinful reactions, they take birth on the pious heavenly planet of Indra, where they enjoy godly delights.
Jai. Okay, there's lots of speculation these days about Soma juice. I can tell you right now, it's not a psychedelic drug, as many people like to say. What it actually is, who knows, right? In one sense, we can sort of infer about its nature from what we hear here in the Gita, but what we hear about here in the Gita is very distinct, right? Again, lots of people make all sorts of speculation about what it is. I think in one sense, we just should be very literal. What is it? It is the thing which those who study the Vedas and seeking the heavenly planets drink, if you get what I mean, right? I think we can I'm sure we've all read countless theories about what Soma actually is. Best to go with what the Gita says. I think most theories are very speculative. Okay. Yeah. As Alex Prabhu said, Joe Rogan is not our acharya on these topics. So, but what is being mentioned here? We are no longer discussing the universal form, are we, right? What are we discussing now? We are discussing the second category of people, right? And who are they? They are those who are engaged in the various forms of worshipping all of these different demigods. Now, one may wonder, how can we consider these people, right, again with the ena, to be engaged in, well, what is the word that's used? Upasate, right? Upasate means to worship, right? How can we say they are engaged in worship of the Lord? Krishna, he begins to describe how we can consider these individuals to be doing so, right? So what does that mean? The means is that they are doing so indirectly. So we'll hear about that in text 21. And maybe we can have Katyayani Mataji say the English, and maybe Mrugang Prabhu again would like to do the Sanskrit for this text.
Yeah, sure. Tetam bhuktva svargalokam vishalam kshine punye martyalokam vishanti evam trayi dharma manu prapanna gata gatam kama kama labhante.
Translation. When they have thus enjoyed vast heavenly sense pleasure and the results of their pious activities are exhausted, they return to this mortal planet again. Thus, those who seek sense enjoyment by adhering to the principles of the three Vedas achieve only repeated birth and death. Thank you.
Jai. Jai. Very nice. So again, we are hearing now about the destination of these people. And what's interesting, and we'll find this in text 23. Actually, we'll quickly do 22 and 23, and we'll treat them all as one big sort of passage. Text 22 is very, very famous. I will, can you accrue more pious credit in the heavenly planets? No, not really. The heavenly planets is where you go to cash them out. I sort of like to think of it as like an arcade. You know, when you go to the arcade and you play all the games and you get all of the points, and then you go to the store and you can redeem them at like Time Zone and stuff. Heavenly planets is kind of like when you get the lollipops at Time Zone, right? That's why it's often described that the human birth is so valuable, not only because we can come to religious performance, but also because we are really generating karma here. Animals don't generate karma, right? And in general, you're not really accruing more credits in the heavenly planets. That's where you're redeeming them. That's why there's even a section of our plane, Bhumandala. This is cosmology stuff, so you're allowed to be bored. But there's a certain part of Bhumandala which is where the demigods who have finished their lives of demigods go, and they pay off the final bits of their pious credits. So it's all about just, you know, getting all those pious credits redeemed. Alex, I'm not sure about your analogy. Sometimes your analogies are a bit too Rasic and esoteric for me. And maybe if you could elaborate on the question, I might be able to answer it. Your microphone is blocked. 1 second. Okay, I'll give you a few seconds. I'll quickly go on with these texts, and then you can formulate the question. So this text now is a very, very famous one, right? Is it one of your memory shlokas? I hope it is. Yeah. Okay. So let's see who's very good. Who's gone ahead with their memory shlokas? Who can give this one a go? Maybe Mrugang Prabhu can hide the Sanskrit. Is anyone willing to give this one a go? Okay, we've got no brave volunteers. Then we'll put it up and yeah. Jai. Perfect. And then let's have Srinivas Prabhu read out the English.
Translation. But those who always worship me with exclusion devotion, meditating on my transcendental form, to them I carry what they lack and I preserve what they have. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Okay, very famous shloka, very wholesome shloka, very beautiful one. This is one that we should often keep with us. We will discuss a whole lot more about this text in a second, but I just want to come to text 23 in regards to our discussion of text 22. And in text 23, let's have Alex, if his microphone is working, can say the English after I said the Sanskrit. Yepyanya devata bhakta yajante shraddhayanvitaha tepi mameva kaunteya yajatyan vidhi purvakam. Okay, no, we cannot hear you. I'm sorry. Let's have quickly who should I ask? On the spot. Let's have Rohan Prabhu say the English.
Those who are devotees of other gods and who worship them with faith actually worship only me, O son of Kunti, but they do so in a wrong way.
Okay, so what we are finding here is even though they are listed as indirectly worshipping Krishna, and even though Krishna is saying that indirectly they have done worship of him, this is still not the proper way for this worship to be expressed, right? And this is a principle that we need to keep in mind. Even though Krishna is facilitating, even though Krishna is acknowledging this as a form of worship, because indirectly all worship goes to Krishna, this is still not an appropriate and a correct one, right? And therefore, we hear again in text 21 that this is not being described positively. This can sound very positive in one sense, right? But what does Krishna say at the end? What is the only achievement they truly have? Go to the heavenly planets, experience being a demigod, and what do you get? Repeated birth and death. That is the only actual fruit of engaging in this process, okay? But in contrast, and again, what was the point that I was making? The point that I was making is that in other chapters, we hear about pure bhakti, occasionally in contrast to impure bhakti. Here, impure bhakti is brought up in order to emphasize pure bhakti, okay? And so here we hear this very, very famous text. But those who always worship me with exclusive devotion, meditating on my transcendental form, okay? Ananyaha, right? This is not Mishra Bhakti, right? This is not, this is definitely not impersonalism. This is not meditating on the universal form, right? This is meditating. Okay, where does it come from, Mrigank? This is Prabhupada. I guess this is Prabhupada pulling out the how do I put it? The significance of Krishna saying "mam," right? On me, when Krishna says "mam," right? Like "sarva dharman parityaja mam ekam sharanam braja," right? It's an impersonalist hermeneutic to say "mam" actually means something else, right? But that's my understanding, at least, right? And then, of course, contextually, we understand that we understand so many more layers of meaning by this "mam," right? But in this one specific sentence, meditating on my transcendental form, what is it? "Mam," right? This is what Krishna has said. Does that make sense? So Srila Prabhupada is just pulling out that distinction. He's making it explicit. Krishna is saying me, right? Not the impersonal Brahman which is in me, right? Not whichever form you feel like worshipping this morning, right? Okay, he's saying "mam." Okay. But Ananyaha, right? This is not Mishra Bhakti, right? This is the bhakti we've already discussed. Satatam, right? Constant engagement in Krishna consciousness. And there's a few interesting philosophical points that can be brought out here. We will be discussing this text for a bit, but we'll do a quick activity in the middle of it as well. Again, it's a bit more of a personal application one, so you won't have to think too hard because, again, today will be a bit philosophical. But one point that I want to make, right, is that those who worship Krishna, right, with exclusive devotion, right, we are hearing that Krishna is doing something very specific, right? He carries what they lack and he preserves what they have, right? And this is a direct form of bhakti. And I want to mention this in terms of the context, because what are the surrounding texts discussing? They're discussing worship of demigods, right? But what are we hearing? Shivam, what are we hearing? When we hear about worship of the demigods, what is it actually doing? Who is actually receiving the worship?
It's Krishna in the end.
Krishna in the end, right? So we're hearing here is direct bhakti being contrasted against indirect bhakti, right? Okay, this is what is being brought out here. Indirect bhakti is described as what? Those who are devotees of other gods, right? Now, this phrase, other gods, is a very interesting one because it implies several things. What does it mean for there to be other gods? Does anyone want to take a stab in the dark? What could it mean when we say other gods? Is there any god beside Krishna? Yes, there is that implication there, isn't there, Mriganka? That's the sort of implication that I want to tease out for a bit before we get into the more wholesome glorification of bhakti. When it says other gods, right, it implies a category of the lowercase g god and the uppercase g god, right? The lowercase g god is like Indra, right? Or Vayu, right? They are all the demigods. That's why sometimes people get offended when we say demigod, because they think we're trying to denigrate the gods, right? But actually what we're doing is we're just trying to make very explicit the distinction. There are gods who are beings who, you know, who have some sort of power, they have some sort of influence, but then there is the God, right? There is uppercase G God. There is God who is the beginning, who is, you know, the beginning and the end, right? The manifester and the annihilator, right? There is the God who is he upon which all reality is strung upon like pearls on a thread, right? And there can't be more than one of those, can there, right? Because by definition, this God is what? The absolute truth, the absolute reality, right? And can there be more than one absolute realities? No. Why did Srila Prabhupada do that? I guess you can ask him. when you've gone back to Godhead, you can ask him. Sometimes Prabhupada translates things in all sorts of ways. Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam. I will stop teaching now. I feel very embarrassed to be teaching in front of Kamsari Sena Prabhu. No. So why does Srila Prabhupada do it? I'm not too sure. But at the very least, it lets me make this philosophical point. So I'm grateful for that. So the point is there can't be more than one God, right? There is God and that is it, right? And that's not a dogmatic statement, right? That's not some sort of fundamentalist statement. People will often say this in a tribalistic way, right? They'll say, my God is real and your God isn't real, right? Because of course they own God, right? My God is real, your God is not real, your God is fake. But that's not the point we're making here. We would hate to make that point because Srila Prabhupada would often make the complete opposite point, right? God means God, right? Srila Prabhupada said there is no such thing as Hindu God, Christian God, Muslim God, right? In the same way that gold is gold, we do not say there is Muslim gold, Christian gold, Hindu gold, right? Gold is always gold, right? And there is only one thing that refers to. It is the same with God. God is absolute, God is infinite, right? And so there can only be one God, right? And that is a universal God. That is a God that's, appreciated in so many different ways. Srila Prabhupada teaches us this. So we're not making a dogmatic point. We're not making a fundamentalist point. We're simply making a philosophical point, right? There can only be one God. And that's why, interestingly, when we read this, normally when we read or write God, we write it with a capital uppercase G, right? But notice, what does it say in this translation? It's a lowercase g, right? The lowercase g gods. You don't have uppercase G gods, right? Because that would be impossible. Okay, so that's enough philosophy to hopefully not. I hope you didn't find that too dry. But the point that I'm trying to make here is, so then when Krishna says those who are devotees of other gods, this is referring to their mentality, right? Their mentality of many gods, these many other beings, right? And so they are not referring to a multiplicity of uppercase G gods. There is only one God, right? Okay. Any questions regarding that point? And also, Shrikanta Sena Prabhu, to get to your question, Prabhupada often translates things very differently. You'll find Prabhupada will translate the same texts in different ways throughout. In Bhagavatam, sometimes in purports, he'll render it differently than he's rendered it in Gita. I guess, yeah, he wants to draw out different emphases, right?
Is it possible that, sorry, will you finish that?
Yeah, no, please go.
Is it possible that Anya Devata also means the multitude of demigods instead of devatas other than me? Is there like multiple ways to understand that?
I guess you could. I'm not confident enough with my Sanskrit to get out into all potential readings. I could see how that would be possible, but yeah, I'm not confident enough in Sanskrit to say like a yes or a no to that. Yeah. But yeah, so those who are devotees of other gods and worship them with faith actually worship only me. And why is that? Why was I just going on that whole rant? Because even if you worship other gods, ultimately there is only one God, right? So when we speak of the gods, we speak of the demigods, of the devatas, of those individuals. But ultimately, worship is being rendered. Ultimately, it can only come to Krishna because Krishna is God. Okay, does that make sense? But they're doing it through an inappropriate way. Avidhi purvakam, right? They're doing it vidhi, we know, the vidhi marg. For those of us who are maybe a bit more familiar with Prabhupada's books, the vidhi refers to the appropriate way of performing worship, right? So the avidhi purvakam is the incorrect method of worship, the incorrect way of worship, okay? But because Krishna is in a different category than the gods, ultimately all worship goes to him. Okay, I hope I haven't lost anyone. Are there any other questions? Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll go back now to this text. If you scroll up. Ananyas chintayanto mam, right? Ananyas chintayanto mam. Okay, this is a very, very famous text, okay? We should always be inspired by this one. What does Krishna say? Sometimes devotees, right? We put so much pressure on ourselves because again, devotional service sometimes is a little difficult. It's very demanding, right? What have we read in this whole chapter? What does devotional service demand of you? Satatam, right? Constant engagement in it, right? And so sometimes we will act, we push ourselves very, very difficultly, right? We'll push ourselves very intensely and we'll feel hopeless. When will I be able to attain this, right? And in one sense, this hopelessness is good, right? It's a very humble thing to think I'm so far away. But on the other hand, we should always have confidence in Krishna. Krishna doesn't say, I preserve what they lack. Right? No. I preserve what they lack, and then I carry what they have, right? Krishna, he says the opposite, right? He's not saying that whatever issues you're having, these are ones that I will perpetually hold on to, right? Because people feel so discouraged, right? I have no taste for the holy name. How often, I'm sure many of us can relate to that, right? Maybe there are many of us here who maybe don't, right? But I'm sure at least a substantial chunk of us have chanted and thought, I have no attraction to the holy name. I know I feel that often, right? I've been chanting now for quite a long while, and yet this name feels so dry to me, right? And so on the one hand, it's good for that to push us to try to go deeper and deeper into our chanting of the holy name. But we also shouldn't enter into some sort of depression, some sort of stress about this, because Krishna has made a general promise, right? That if one is engaging somehow in pure bhakti, right? Krishna, he carries what they lack and he preserves what we have. Okay, we'll discuss more about this text, but I actually think before we make a deep dive into it, because we will be going in depth, I think it's better we have our 5-minute break a little bit early. So let's have our 5-minute break now. We'll resume at 11:03, if that works with everyone else. And I'll see you on the other side. Okay, Hare Krishna. Okay, so this text is so very famous, so very beautiful. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives a really, really wonderful description of this. We find what word is used by Krishna. What does he do? What is he doing for the devotee? Vahami. What does Vahami mean? Who can tell me? What does Vahami mean? I'll give you a hint. It's right on the screen. Vahami means to carry, right? And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he emphasizes this to quite a length, right? And he says that this word is used for a very specific reason, right? I'm sure some of us have heard the story of Arjuna Charya in terms of this shloka, how he tries to correct the shloka. And he wipes out Vahami and he replaces it with Karomi, right? And then he goes off, and then Krishna, and then when he leaves home, the two little boys knock on his door and his wife opens the door. We all know this pastime, right? Oh, I'm seeing some head shakes. Okay, I'll say the pastime then. It's a wholesome one. You'll hear it in Bhagavatam classes often. So yeah, I wasn't sure who's heard it or who hasn't. Yeah, so Arjuna Charya, he was writing a Gita commentary. And when he saw this verse, he thought it must have been some sort of transcription error, some sort of mistake, right? Because how can we say that the Lord carries, right? This is the point Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur was making. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur was saying that the reason why Vahami is chosen as the word is to make it clear that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Bhagavan Krishna, is directly carrying the devotee. It's not that he's doing it through any agent. It's not that he's saying, okay, I will make Mahamaya support the devotee. Vahami means directly Krishna. He is directly physically supporting the devotee. This is what Vahami means, right? So Chakravarti Thakur, he actually compares this to a grihastha, right? He says that in the same way that a grihastha man is supporting his wife and children, in the same way Krishna, he is carrying, in the same way that it can feel like, and again, for the grihasthas watching this, I'm sure they can relate to that feeling of feeling like they're having to carry all these responsibilities, right? That same effort, that same heaviness of carrying that weight, that is the same heaviness which Krishna carries the devotee with, right? That is the analogy that Chakravarti Thakur gives, right? So this is very heavy and strong language. And so Arjuna Charya, when he read this, he thought, oh, surely this cannot be true. This cannot be the case, right? Many people, their Aishvarya, their reverence from the Lord can get in the way of the sweetness of the Lord, right? I'm remembering now, you've got me started now by saying this on pastime. I remember once I was hearing Tripurari Maharaj and I think Jagadguru Swami, two sannyas disciples of Srila Prabhupada, when Srila Prabhupada was doing some preaching in South India, or he had sent them to South India, something like that. They were speaking to a Brahmin, right, and a very learned scholar, who was a scholar in the Sri Vaishnav Sampradaya. And he was with them and he was laughing and he was speaking beautiful Krishna Katha, wonderful pastimes of Krishna from the Alvars and stuff like this, right? So beautiful. And he was laughing and tears were coming out of his eyes. Such sweet Krishna Katha he was speaking. And then at one point, I think Jagadguru Maharaj, he said, yes. And then, Narayan does this. And immediately this Brahmin's face, he dropped and he said, no. We cannot laugh when speaking about Narayan. That is a very serious topic, right? So we can see sometimes the Aishvarya, this reverence, he comes out very strongly. And so this devotee, right, Arjuna Charya, he saw this Vahami and he thought this is too intimate. How can we say that the Supreme Lord is directly carrying his devotee? Instead, it must be Karomi, right? Karomi, Karoti, yeah, Karomi, right? And so he went out and in his commentary, he said the word is actually Karomi, right? But while he was gone, there was a knock on his door, right? And this beautiful little blue boy, right? He came in and he said, we are in very, very big trouble. Please give us shelter, right? There is a scholar named Arjuna Charya, right? And he is about to beat us, right? And so she was thinking, how could my wonderful husband be beating someone? This is very, very, I can't believe my husband, he is a very simple Brahmin, right? He would not be engaged in beating anyone. And so this dark boy with shams on the skin, he turned around and he showed on the back of his back that there was these big dashes and injuries and wounds, right? And so in this way, Arjuna Charya's wife, she was very, very upset. She was very, very concerned. She was thinking, oh, this little child, so sweet. He couldn't lie, but I feel very, 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 very sad to hear this, right? what happened though is she began to eat, right? Because the food, there was food brought by these boys, right? So she began to eat, and her husband came home. And as we know, in Vedic culture, traditionally, the wife waits for the husband, and then the eating is done together, right? So in this way, he became very, very upset, right? And he said, why have you done this? Have I done something wrong? Have you insulted me somehow, right? And then she told him, she said, you've become such a cruel person, you know? You're beating this beautiful little innocent boy running around. And so in this way, he heard this and he thought, you know, personally, I haven't been beating too many sweet little blue boys recently, right? So he was thinking, you know, how could I have beaten him, right? And then thinking and hearing upon the description, right, that his wife was giving, she was thinking, actually, no, there's another pastime. I won't get into it, but it's described in Shastras that through Hari Katha, right, through Hari Katha, this is the only way we can capture Shyam Sundar Krishna. Even through mantra, we cannot as strongly capture Shyam Sundar Krishna as we can through the hearing of his qualities and pastimes. So in this way, she was speaking Hari Katha, right? And so he began to realize, oh, this was Bhagavan Krishna himself, right? And he realized that by scratching the words away, by scratching Vahami away, it had been like he was beating Krishna, right? Because he was scratching away the words of Krishna by replacing it with some other word, right? And therefore Krishna had come to chastise his commentary and to say that by replacing my words, I want to glorify my devotee so much. You are hurting me by taking away the glorification of the love I have for my devotees. I have so much love for my devotees. By you saying that I'm simply giving some agent, I'm simply providing for them, I am not simply providing for my devotee. I am carrying them myself directly. And by saying any other thing, you're directly abusing me. This is the glorification, right? As I've said before, accidentally paused the recording. As I said before, this whole chapter has either been an indirect or a direct chapter of pure bhakti. And here it's coming out fully again. Krishna is saying, this is the level of love I have for my devotee, right? What do we hear in Chaitanya Charitamrita? The whole world revolves around Krishna. But who does Krishna revolve? Well, who does Krishna revolve around? Krishna revolves around his devotees, right? Okay, so it's a famous little pastime. I'm sure, as I said it, many of you will have recognized, you've heard it before. So this is relevant to here. And again, our acharyas make so much point about this, right? Vahami, right? Krishna, he is so invested in his devotee. Okay, and then we go on. We've already just discussed text 23. Then let's go into text 24. And text 24 basically makes the point we've already made. Krishna, he is the ultimate recipient of all of these things. Aham hi sarva yagyanam bhokta cha prabhur eva cha natu mam abhijananti tatvenantash shyavanti te. Let's have Sri Mataji can say the English.
I am the only enjoyer and master of all sacrifices. Therefore, those who do not recognize my true transcendental nature fall down.
Jai. So here we're seeing that principle generally getting elaborated upon, right? What is the only fruit that they have, right? They fall down, right? Again, this is the same point. What is the fruit of following this form of infatuation with demigods, right? Exactly. As Srikanta Sena Prabhu has mentioned, it's the exact same thing we've already been discussing a while, right? I don't need to discuss it too much more. This is basically another variation on the flowery words of the Vedas, okay? So let's keep on going then. And then let's go to text 25. Yanti deva vrata devan pitrinyanti pitri vrataha bhutani yanti bhutejya yanti mad yajinopi mam. Okay, so here we have, let's have Divyansh Prabhu again read out the English.
Those who worship the demigods will take birth among the demigods. Those who worship the ancestors go to the ancestors. Those who worship ghosts and spirits will take birth among such beings. And those who worship me will live with me. Thank you.
No, thank you. So here we find, again, this is reiterating the point. Now, in a sense, as I said before, chapter 9, in one sense, is a rather circular chapter. It sort of has like a an onion structure, in the sense that it's like these layers going around. So we're coming around to the same point that was made before. Again, we've discussed it to a degree. Of course, we could go highly in depth, but the general principle is there already, right? This is the fairness of Krishna. You go where your desire is, right? And that's why, as we were discussing in chapter 8, we were hearing about the attaining the ultimate abode, right? And we were hearing about the importance of one's meditation. It's all that sort of stuff again. But what is it ramping up to? It's ramping up to text 26. And text 26 is incredibly, incredibly significant, right? Text 26 is one of the most famous texts, and it has to be one of your memory shlokas. So once again, I'm going to ask, who's memorized text 26? Uma Devi Mataji has unmuted. So are you going to go for it?
Yes, Prabhuji. Patram pushpam phalam toyam yo me bhaktya prayachati tadaham bhaktya uparitam ashnami praitatmanaha. Thank you.
Yeah. So this one is so incredibly famous. If one offers me with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water, I will accept it. Okay? This is such a famous text, and it is such a significant one. Krishna, he's just finished describing, right, how the demigods are worshipped and how that indirectly, how those sacrifices done to the demigods indirectly go to him. Now he's describing how one directly sacrifices to Krishna, right? And how does one directly sacrifice to Krishna, right? How is it? Is it done through all these complex rituals? Is it done through all of these things? No, it's simply done with the heart, right? And so, again, I've spoken a bit of pastime. I hate to just speak about more pastimes, but I actually don't hate it. So there's another famous pastime, right, which very much embodies this, right? Who knows? Does anyone actually know? This shloka gets repeated by Krishna in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Which pastime is it? Does anyone know?
Is this Sudama Vipra?
Yes, the Brahmin friend of Krishna, right? So, for those of us who don't know, Krishna, he had a very, very dear friend when he was young, right? In the Gurukul, in school together. He was a childhood friend of Krishna, right? And he was a very, very self-controlled Brahmin, right? Of very high qualities. And of course, as Krishna went on to live his Kshatriya life, this Brahmin and Krishna, they went off on their own separate life paths, right? The Brahminical career is very different to the Kshatriya career, right? And so Krishna, he became a really, a great king of Dwarka. And Sudama, he became a very simple Brahmin. But because of his simplicity, he struggled a lot financially, right? Okay, I will quickly pause the thing just to answer Srikanta Sena Prabhu's question. If we don't actually have love for Krishna, but we want to have love for Krishna, and we offer, does Krishna accept with the same fullness as described in this verse? Is a very fantastic question, and this is why we offer to Srila Prabhupada first and then to Krishna, because we're not actually offering to Srila Prabhupada. We are asking Srila Prabhupada, I have so many desires to enjoy this bhoga. I am looking at this bhoga and all I want to do is eat it. You maybe don't need to be that blunt, right? But in all honesty, that's the majority of our desires. I don't have this heart. I maybe have a few moments where I think, oh, wow, Krishna will enjoy this. But most of the time I'm thinking, wow, how much will I enjoy this? But instead, when we offer to Srila Prabhupada, when we offer the bhoga, we should offer with the attitude, with our hearts, saying, Srila Prabhupada, I have all the desire to enjoy this, but I know you only have the desire to offer this to Krishna. Also, when we offer to our spiritual master, right? All the way up to parampara, please pass this. The parampara is the link which connects us to Krishna. So when we offer to the spiritual master, he gives it to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada gives it to Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada. And like this, you say, I have all of these filthy desires which I wish to exploit. I have all of these things. I wish to enjoy this for myself. But you only wish to serve this and offer this to Krishna. So I'm giving this to you, and you please offer this to Krishna purely. And that's why we go through the parampara. If we went directly to Krishna, then we would be offering all of our desire for exploitation, all of our desire for all of these things. And I don't think Krishna will be too satisfied by it. Krishna wants it with love and devotion. But again, this is the mercy of the spiritual master. This is the mercy of the Vaishnavas, right? Because the Vaishnavas are filled with love and devotion, and they will take our offering and very mercifully, if we humbly approach them, offer it with love and devotion, and then Krishna accepts it. Does that make sense? That's why ultimately, how can we tell? Sometimes people will wonder, how can we tell if this is prasad or not, right? How can we know Krishna has accepted this? It's one of the most frustrating answers. The only way we can tell is if a pure devotee acknowledges it as prasad, right? That's all we can tell, right? Srila Prabhupada was he once visited a temple and he said, "This is not prasadam, this is dog food." That's what Srila Prabhupada said, okay? So sometimes, who knows, right? It's a little difficult for us to say we can pray and hope, right? And that's why Srila Prabhupada wouldn't offer everything that he gave out as prasad, especially fruit and stuff like that. Srila Prabhupada would just give apples. He wouldn't necessarily offer them. Why? Because what is the point of, because everything that Srila Prabhupada does, everything that the pure devotee does, is constantly done in engagement for Krishna, right? And constantly engaged in Krishna, by Srila Prabhupada utilizing that apple, it's already been offered to Krishna. Every act that Srila Prabhupada does is offered to Krishna. He doesn't need the ritual because the essence is already there. But again, until we're at the platform of being a Mahatma, yeah, we stick to the ritual. And again, we offer to the parampara to purify our impure offering. Okay, so Krishna, he has this childhood friend, right? And we're all very familiar with the pastime. Interestingly enough, our acharyas say that his wife was even more renounced than he was, right? Because what would happen is she would prepare the cooking and she would feed him first, and then she would feed whatever was left over. And there was very, very little in the first place. They were both very malnourished, right? They were completely starving. They were completely struggling, right? They were struggling Brahminical scholars, right? And because of this, they were in a very difficult place, right? So one day, the question got brought up. Well, maybe your friend Krishna, right? Your friend Krishna, he is a great king. Maybe he'll be able to help you, right? And there's a whole back and forth. Our acharyas, they described that actually, Sudama's wife, she was shaking, right? And why was she shaking? Because she was shaking at the thought of approaching the Supreme Personality of Godhead to ask for anything besides bhakti, right? Again, the glories of Sudama's wife are very often missed, but she's one of the most glorious personalities in this pastime, right? She's very indirectly glorified throughout it. And so she's shaking, right? Because she's thinking in fear, right? Not fear because she's afraid of Krishna, but she's thinking, how could I be in such a position to ask of anything but bhakti? But eventually they have a back and forth, and she convinces Sudama, right? To go ask Krishna. Please go ask him for some alms, ask him for something, right? And then at the very least, he thinks, at least I can go see my my old friend, right? Anyways, so they don't have much, right? We know very famously, they don't have anything to give. But when you go visit someone, you have to give something, right? You have to give some sort of gift. You have to give some sort of offering, especially if that someone happens to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead, okay? So Sudama's wife, she prepares some chipped rice. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever had chipped rice before, but it's not particularly nectarian, okay? It's not the nicest dish you can have. It's nice if you mix it in with something, but this is just some plain chipped rice. Mrugang Prabhu is about to say something. No, okay, accidentally unmuted. So like this, she gives just a small amount of chipped rice, and she ties it up in this torn up cloth, right? And with this torn up cloth, he walks, right? It's described in Srimad Bhagavatam that when he enters, there's actually, because Krishna, he's a king at this point, right? And what does a king have? A king has all of these armies, all of these stations, all of these protections, all of these bodyguards. But it's described that by purely the bhakti, purely by the devotion of Sudama Brahmin, his friend, right? Purely by this devotion, he simply was guided through all of the big camps, all of the soldiers, they all ignored him. They didn't even realize he was strolling through. This simple Brahmin penetrated through armor and defenses that no other army ever could, right? The most majestic armies would not be able to break through these defenses. But the simple Sudama Brahmin, he simply walked through like that, right? So like this, he walks through. And there's many, many different palaces, but he arrives in one of them. Does anyone know which palace? Because we know Krishna, he has a palace where all of his wives are. Each wife is in a palace and he's present in all of them. But does anyone know who is the wife of Krishna that Sudama walks into? Which palace? Yes, it's Rukmini Devi. Some manuscripts of Srimad Bhagavatam say Saibhya, but our acharyas say that is very wrong. And so we humbly accept our, our acharyas' opinions, right? Sometimes you'll hear in some Bhagavad Saptahas, I think, sometimes they'll base it off that in other Sampradayas, they'll base it off that reading and they'll say Saibhya. But yeah, our acharyas through very, very strongly. I find it interesting that they have such strong feelings about it, but they do have strong feelings about it. And they say it's very definitely Rukmini. So he stumbles in, right? And so Rukmini's there. And of course, we've all heard this pastime before, so I won't go on too long about it. But as he comes in, he's very embarrassed to give his offering. But what does Krishna do, right? We've heard this whole chapter is indirectly Krishna just manifesting which quality? Bhakta Vatsala. Krishna just wants to glorify his devotee. What else is there? What did we hear again before? Is Krishna simply providing for his devotee? No, he's directly carrying his devotee, right? And so what does Krishna do when he sees his old childhood friend in a torn up dhoti? Everyone else is confused. They're thinking, who is this individual coming in, right? Everyone is so beautifully dressed in Dwarka, right? Everyone is so majestic and wonderful, right? We hear this in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the glorifications of Krishna returning to Dwarka. It's sometimes devotees get confused because it's described that there's even the prostitutes in Dwarka, right? But we have to think, what was the point of mentioning that? The point is that even those people who are seen as so low in society, even them are considered to be so beautiful and elevated in Dwarka. And so they're seeing this person in a torn up dhoti, right? Completely impoverished, completely skinny, right? Completely malnourished. And he's come in. And what does Krishna do with this person? He runs up and he begins to wash his feet, right? He gives him such a strong embrace and he washes the feet of his impoverished friend, right? And then they go ahead and they begin to reminisce about the good old days, right? They discuss all their childhood memories in school, right? And then at one point, Krishna, because Krishna does know a thing or two. It's almost like he's omniscient, right? He knows everything. And so he knows why his friend has come. And not only this, he knows that his friend has brought something, right? And so he says, surely you've brought something for me. And so Sudama, he very shyly presents with him the chipped rice. And Krishna has a few grains and he begins to relish it so much. He says, this is the most delicious thing I've ever had, right? This is so delicious. This is so nice. And Sudama Brahmin, he begins to become a little embarrassed. But what does Krishna say? He says, I want more, I want more, I want more. And then what does Krishna say at this moment in the pastime? What does he say? Who can tell me? What does Krishna say? Someone might know. You can even say the Sanskrit maybe. Patram pushpam phalam toyam yo me bhaktya prayachati tadaham bhaktyupahritam ashnami prayatat manaha. Right? So Krishna, he says virtually this, right? If I remember correctly, the Sanskrit might be slightly different, but for all intents and purposes, he says this, right? And our acharyas, they make the point, right? Because what is the context of this? The context of this is in eating, right? But Krishna, he's mentioning a flower, a leaf, right? Only fruit and water are what you drink and eat, right? But our acharyas, what do they mention? They say that Krishna has mentioned a leaf and a flower again. Why? Because he's so overwhelmed by the love that his devotees have. When he sees an offering that is presented to him with love, he is completely overwhelmed, right? Yes, exactly, the peels of bananas. And Krishna becomes so intoxicated by that love that he will eat anything, right? Krishna eats the bhakti, not necessarily the offering. There was one very conservative Babaji in Vrindavan. And he was once asked, he was famous for giving ultra-conservative viewpoints, so viewpoints that we in ISKCON would disagree with, right? Very strongly, because in the broad scheme of things, ISKCON is very progressive, right? So we would disagree, right? But he was once asked, if I can't cook rotis, can I make pizzas for Krishna, right? And so they were expecting, what were they expecting? They were expecting him to say, no, you must cook specifically rotis for Krishna, right? But he said, cook the pizza, right? if you are more able to enter into a meditation on Krishna, then cook the pizza. Because Krishna does not eat the pizza, he does not eat the roti. He eats the love that has been used to make it, right? So anyway, so Krishna, he's completely infatuated, right? He's completely infatuated and he completely eats all of this, right? And in all of this ecstasy and all of this joy, Sudama, he forgets to ask, right? And so he walks away. He doesn't say anything about him being in poverty or anything whatsoever. And so walking home, he thinks, good, I didn't ask. I had something so much better. I had darshan of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I got to see the Supreme Lord. I got to associate with the Supreme Lord. How wonderful is this, right? But then as he begins to approach home, what does he see? He walks past it. He thinks, oh, no, that's not my house. I've got some new neighbor, some very rich new neighbor. Oh, that's very interesting. Hopefully they'll give me some nice alms when I go to beg from them. And he walks past it, and then his wife calls out, right? And she looks very, very different. But she says, my husband, come take a look. This is our house now. Now, sometimes it's wondered why Sudama, he kept his previous, why he also didn't have his body restored. And the reason why is because if he had had his body restored as well as his wife's body, then his wife wouldn't have recognized him when he would come home, and he would have just walked past and gone, who knows where. He would have never come home, right? So he was kept in that condition so that his wife would be able to recognize him. And she recognizes him and calls him over, right? And like this, she calls him over and he sees so wonderfully, oh, Krishna, he knew what was in my heart. Krishna is antaryami, right? He is in my heart and he knew what was in my heart. But there is a question that sometimes gets raised. And the question is, if Krishna knew what was in Sudama's heart, why did he not tell him, okay, I've granted you this? Why did he not tell him, okay, I'm giving you this blessing, right? If Krishna knew what was in his heart, why didn't he say, okay, Sudama, you've so wonderfully given me this chipped rice. So now I will give you all of these riches so that you will comfortably live your life. And by the way, Sudama, interestingly enough, does not comfortably live his life. He still lives completely renounced. Even though Krishna has blessed him with wealth that even the demigods cannot understand, Sudama still lived very simply. But the reason why Krishna did not say it, it's described by our acharyas, is that Krishna felt embarrassed. Krishna felt ashamed. Krishna thought, Sudama has given me so much. He has given me these bits of chipped flat rice, right? How could I be so shameful to give him so little than greater wealth than any of the demigods could dream of? How could I be so cheap? He has given me so much bhakti and I'm giving him so little in return. What I have given is worth nothing compared to that simple love and devotion he has given in these bits of chipped rice. This is how our acharyas describe it, right? This is why Krishna, he does not say anything to Sudama. He waits until he gets home, right? Because he's just filled with shame that he would give him so little. So this is the value of offering. This is how sacrifice to Krishna is done, right? It is not opulent in any sense of material opulence, but it is so very cherishable. It is so very valuable, right? This is the value. This is a transcendental system, right? It's just completely beyond anything we can conceive, right? And this is the nature by which one approaches the Supreme Lord. This is the nature by which one offers to him. Okay, so that was a bit of a long tangent, but yeah, it's a very relevant pastime to this text. And then we hear text 27, which is of course very iconic as well, right? Maybe we can have, if Alex's microphone is working, he can say the English for this text. Yat koroshi yadashnasi yajjuhoshi dadasi yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat kurushva madarpanam.
Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer or give away, and whatever austerities you perform, do that, O son of Kunti, as an offering to me.
Yes, okay. So this verse is technically actually referring to karma yoga, okay? Technically, it's referring to karma yoga. Can anyone identify why?
Because the focus is on what you want to do.
Yes, the focus is on what you're already doing. Whatever you're doing, whatever you're eating, whatever you offer or give away, right? Whatever your austerities you perform, do that as an offering to Krishna, right? So in the first part, the first text 26, this is describing bhakti. This is bhakti, right? So simple, right? So direct, so straightforward. And Krishna is being very specific. He's saying what he wants, right? What does he say? Patram pushpam phalam, right? Actually, interestingly enough, patram pushpam phalam, what are they? Are they in the, is he saying, what, offer me fruits, offer me leaves, offer me flowers? Is this what Krishna is saying? No, he's saying simply, just offer me a fruit, just offer me a flower. That's all I need. You don't even need to offer me many fruits. Just offer me one fruit, but do it with love and I'm satisfied. This is the very specific nature of bhakti, right? So this one is explicitly about bhakti, this previous text, text 26. In fact, Krishna mentions bhakti twice in this very famous text. But what does he say in this text? This text now is a description on the level of karma, right? Because, again, there is no mention of bhakti, right? And secondly, because it's describing something that's already being done, right? So already being done, you can offer this. But again, why are we hearing this? These are all indirect glorifications of bhakti, nevertheless. Yeah. Okay. So now I think we can go into our activity. Actually, no, let's do text 28 and then we'll go into our activity to wrap up. Let's have, who have I not asked? Is there anyone I haven't asked to read out the English? Have I asked Sev Amrita to read out the English? Sev Amrita either way can read out the English. Shubha Shubha Phalayar Evam Moksha Se Karma Bandhanaihi Sanyasa Yoga Yuktatma Vimukto Mam Upaishyasi.
In this way, you will be free from bondage to work and its auspicious and inauspicious results. With your mind fixed on me in this principle of renunciation, you will be liberated and come to me.
Jai. Jai, Jai, Jai. Okay, Nectar. This is now sort of concluding this. So he's describing the person in the previous verse. Again, Patram Pushpam Palam Toyam is just transcendental, right? But 27 to 28, all of this is transcendental. But 27 to 28 is very specifically, they're very connected, right? And so this one is describing the results of the person in text 27. What happens? They not only become liberated, but they don't just get mukti, but what do they get? They get vimukti, right? So this is something very, very high and very, very elevated. This is the specific glory of the devotees, right? So this is a very special consideration. Naturally, this also applies to text 26, but that almost goes without saying, right? But primarily, this is a result of text 27. Okay, let's quickly do our activity. Okay, yeah, no problem, Sevamrita Mataji, because we're anyways entering into the activity now. So if you want, you can just leave now. We'll quickly going to do a brief activity, seeing then if a few people are leaving, and we already had a few people who were a little sick. We'll just do a one group activity. We won't do it as a breakout room then. Basically, it was another drama that we're going to be doing. And so the drama will be, you're essentially going to meet somebody on the street, right? Who is somebody who's studied the Gita, right? And so what you're going to try to demonstrate to them is that Krishna Bhakti is very, very easily performed, right? So I want you to both stress that, so one of you will have to write out the, you're a bunch of people and you're discussing. Some of you are presenting viewpoints against Bhakti. It's too difficult, it's too complex, etc., etc., or it's too simple, or on the other hand, it's too accessible, it's not giving the highest thing, etc., etc. And the other half of you presenting from this chapter have to present the opposite counter argument, right? So basically, it's a little like the debate, except you can think it out and make it out like a drama. And then maybe, depending on how much time we have, we can perform it next week, when everyone else is here. Okay. So does that make sense? I'll pause the recording.
Okay, Hare Krishna. So my team was representing the atheist viewpoint, and the reason why we don't need Krishna consciousness is just because there's so much confusion with it. We say that this is like the philosophy which is going to bring us back to God, but there's actually so many religions, so many philosophies which are saying the same thing. How can we actually say that the Krishna conscious philosophy is the correct philosophy when there's so many people saying the same thing about their religion? There's some religions which allow for, you don't even need to chant, you don't even need to do so many things. Going back to God is very easy. You can still eat meat, you can still do all kinds of gambling and drinking because it's okay. So I would rather live a simple life, a life where I can enjoy myself. And, I don't want to follow these rules. I don't want to waste my youth doing all these things. So my team will further discuss these points, primarily the fact that, we're young, we have things to do. As you get older, you can do these things. And also following the 4 regs, like it doesn't need to be done. There's lots of religions where you can go back to God just by eating meat and gambling and drinking. And it's just so hard following Krishna consciousness, like we need to eat prasad, we can't eat outside. It's like we're really missing out on the human experience by not doing these things. And also the Brahminical perspective is Krishna consciousness, they just make it seem too easy and too hard for some people. For some people, it's just, chant and eat prasad and you go back to Godhead, while other people is like, you need to be very strict, you need to do these things, you need to gain an understanding about Krishna. So there's just so much confusion in Krishna consciousness. I'd rather just not follow it at all.
You've convinced me. Okay, so does the pro team want to have their first speaker go?
Yeah. Hare Krishna. So we believe that bhakti is the best way to live our lives. Based on the Bhagavad-gītā, Krishna is saying that this is the most confidential knowledge. So because it's confidential, there must be something in it, and it's most purifying. So you follow the 4 regulative principles. It's very easily accessible. When you chant, you can experience that you're purifying your soul. You're making whatever you eat, you're offering to Krishna. That purifies your soul as well. So it's very easily purifying your consciousness. And unlike other processes, bhakti is directly experienced. So when you're going through these processes, you're directly experiencing bhakti, and it gives you pleasure while performing as well. So bhakti gives you pleasure while performing. So basically, when you said that by eating meat and just having fun in the material world, you still can go back to Godhead, but it leads to more entanglement and you're accruing more karma as well. So that really doesn't take you back to Godhead. It just leads to more entanglement in the material world.
I'm muted. Okay, I've been convinced back in the other direction. Let's have the next speaker go quickly, and then yeah. And I'm liking also, just quickly, I'm liking just from Magangpu's team, I'm liking the references to chapter 9. Ideally, if you guys can pepper in some 9th chapter reference. But yeah, please, first team can go. Next speaker.
So the point that I have is that the 4 regulative principles, they're too difficult to follow for pretty much everyone in this modern age. No intoxication, no meat eating, no gambling, no illicit sex. Like there's so many people that pretty much enjoy the nightlife. Like after work, they just go to the city and they just enjoy there. And then Krishna consciousness, there's just too many restrictions. You know, you can't go outside to eat like things. You can't go parties. You're like, you know, other religions like Islam and Christianity, they don't have that many restrictions. Like in Christianity, you're allowed to eat pretty much anything. And same with Islam, it's just like a certain thing. Like it's just, I think, pig that you're not allowed to eat, because apparently it's like bad, but yeah. And then like a rebuttal question that I have for what Bhakti-śāstrī Mataji said was, if bhakti is accessible, as you said, then how can some people fall down?
Hare Krishna.
Jai. Mrigang Prabhu wasn't having any of that. Yeah, please go, Sri Mataji.
Okay, Hare Krishna. So first of all, I'd like to make some rebuttals. So first of all, like going back to our discussion on, you know, how Krishna consciousness, and there's so many different religions and there's so much confusion about, you know, what needs to be done, or so many religions are saying the same thing. That is correct. You know, all religions, their essence is the same, right? It is to love God. That is what religion actually is. And so the different religions that we have, there are different ways of attaining this goal. But having said that, bhakti or Krishna consciousness is the best and most simple way to achieve that. As Bhumagita Mataji said, doing bhakti is joyful and it's experiential when you're actually doing the devotional service. So the other team made the point about, you know, how following the 4 regulative principles is so difficult. You know, it's like you're missing out on the human experience, quote unquote. So we'd like to say that when you engage in bhakti, since it's experiential, you're actually given something higher by rendering service to the Lord. You then don't feel the need, you don't have that desire to have that human experience. And in chapter 9 of the Bhagavad-gītā, you know, 9.13 and 14, they're describing the qualities of a Mahatma, you know, who's constantly engaged in the devotional service and chanting the glories of the holy name. And so by bhakti, you transcend all these like material desires. And in response to the question, you know, if bhakti is so accessible, how do you fall down? That just indicates, you know, in your practice, like whoever has fallen down, or if you do, first of all, like bhakti, you can never lose on your bhakti, right? Your bhakti bank account balance kind of never decreases, it always increases. But you may have like a stagnant stage if you have like misunderstandings or you are incorrectly applying the Krishna consciousness philosophy. And so that's when you would, you know, take further shelter or guidance of devotees. Thank you.
Hari Bol. Boom indeed. So I think it's the last speaker on the NT side, or have you finished? Have I lost track?
Yes. Hare Krishna. I was born and brought up in a family where there are some family rituals. So I don't have enough time to perform them itself. I don't have time to chant 16 rounds. I have my own motive and I have to develop, I have to build on my family responsibilities and take care of everyone. I don't have to practice or to take up this process of bhakti.
I have a counter argument for Sri Mataji if we still have time.
Please, anyone's feel free to go to leave if you want. But
It's speaker. Sorry? What's this about?
I'm curious what Divyanshu has to say. Let the rules go out the door.
Yeah. So Sri Mataji mentioned that you have to perform devotional service. You have to focus. You have to spend time practicing devotional service. But we can say that people that have ADHD or autism or some sort of disorder that can't focus, do they not find peace and happiness? How will they be able to, you know, come to peace with their life if they're not performing Krishna consciousness? Like, this is like, it sounds a bit unfair to people that are not able to, you know, perform Krishna consciousness or even have any taste for it. So why would that be the case for those people? I don't know.
Actually, Mister, can you say it again?
So I'm just saying that how it's unfair for people how Krishna consciousness is believed to be the be all and end all for peace and happiness, but people that have disorders, why is it unfair for them that they might not be able to do that because they don't have, you know, that focus or that mind, like that ability to perform devotional service, because it requires a lot of I think attention and seriousness if you want to get deep into Krishna consciousness.
Yeah, very good. Can I have a go at rebutting this? Yeah, okay. So thank you. That's a very valid point. However, I would like to emphasize that, you know, in practicing bhakti yoga, the emphasis more is not on, you know, the result or how well you have performed the service. It's more on your mood and, you know, the intent and the love and devotion by which you're serving the Lord. So in 9.22, you know, Krishna, he says, I carry for devotees or anyone, like I carry what they lack and I preserve what they have. So even if, you know, for example, you mentioned people with autism, they may not be able to carry out devotional service as per what, you know, you would like what some people, like how others may, you know, everyone is different, but still Krishna will accept that. And that because, you know, it's about that mood and devotion. You know, in the class we heard today, right? Krishna eats that love, that bhakti, not necessarily the offering. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mother. That's a very valid point. I would like to add one point in here, if time permits. So if the essence is bhakti and everyone is to follow only bhakti, then why there are so many differences within even the ISKCON community? So even the people thinks that they fight each other based on their gurus, and they even Prabhupada is given the wonderful. Sorry, someone is saying something.
Sorry, I'm just stirring the pot. Don't worry, ignore me.
Sorry?
No. Somebody accidentally unmuted.
Okay. So he has given the very simple simple procedure to practice bhakti, but why it is so complicated? Well, when we are practicing bhakti, especially, and why there are so many groups is happening. So that means there is something is lacking in this practice. That is what my argument.
Can we get Tanya to speak? Because she's our third speaker and she's the best skilled in devotional service, but also bhakti and also debating.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, that was a good question. My response to that is that disagreement is not just prevalent in ISKCON, that disagreement is prevalent in any form and shape in this material world, in any group. Wherever there are more than two people, there's always disagreement, and that's how we function. That's how this material world is. And bhakti is also a process to get out of the cycle of birth and death, to get out of this material world, which also we can see in text 21, where Krishna is saying that those who seek sense enjoyment only achieve repeated birth and death. So going back to Rohan Prabhu and Shivam Prabhu's points as well about how it's so easy to have meat and gamble and have illicit sex and drink and all of that. Surely it is, but then like, is it, first of all, happiness is a very relative term. Yes, you might be enjoying breaking those 4 regulative principles. What happens after that? What happens after people get hangovers? They are sick and they're crying. How much happiness did they get out of that episode of drinking? So I guess, and to counter argue that as well, I derive a lot of happiness by going to the temple and doing garlands. So it's really to develop your interest in what you derive happiness from. So if you derive happiness from drinking, sure, but that's not going to give you permanent happiness, and you can keep trying, and we can, I think it's a, you can develop experience, and your experience will give you the answer itself. So just to summarize my group's points, Bhakti is the only way to attain Krishna and to advance in spirituality. And it is the most purifying process, and it can definitely be directly experienced, and it always gives a sense of enjoyment.
I have counters to that, sorry. So not everyone enjoys drinking. I think you can't just, like, I mean, that's an example that you used, which is fair, but people that are there that are very sober, but they find happiness in other things, like taking care of animals, or doing some sort of art or anything like that. They find a lot of peace in that. So as you said that you find happiness doing garlands, there can be people out there that find happiness doing sewing or something like that. And then, like, even as you say, older people, they enjoy doing stuff like stuff like sewing or anything like that. That doesn't mean they're not happy. You can't say that I mean, I don't know if you said that if they're happy or not, but they still seem very much at peace with what they're doing, and they find happiness in these material activities. So this doesn't have to involve intoxication or gambling or any of that, but they can still find, come to peace with with their life doing these things. So yeah.
I can give a go at it, but obviously someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but all of that is temporary happiness. So all of what Divyansh Prabhu is talking about, people finding happiness in looking after animals or sewing and all of that, yes, definitely that will give you happiness, but it's temporary in nature. And bhakti is like the happiness. But yeah, someone can elaborate and explain that in a better way.
So there's many cases though that where you're doing bhakti and you've been doing it for years.
Just quickly, you can keep on going. I'm happy to keep this into Q&A section. But just as a heads up, the homework is to read the first 11 texts of chapter 10, just so that's on your radars. Yeah, now keep on going.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, you've seen many cases where you might be performing Krishna consciousness for multiple years, for 10 to 20 years, but then you see some cases where people are not still able to find full love, like love for Krishna or full taste. Maybe it's a lack of association or the lack of devotion, but you see that the practice, like, there's still some space that is not filled. And sorry, I forgot what I was trying to argue for. What was the point that you made, that you're practicing Krishna consciousness and you're feeling happiness, but that's not the case every time. I think it can be that you're doing it as a duty, and you've always done it as a duty without realizing that you're doing it as a duty, and then later on in life you realize, am I really getting the taste? Am I really able to find Krishna consciousness to be helpful in my life, or like give me happiness? That, I mean, I think it's from person to person. Like, it really depends on who you are individually and how you take Krishna consciousness, because many people might take it instantly and they become Krishna consciousness very quickly in their lives, Krishna consciousness very quickly in their lives. But it might it definitely differs from person to person, from individual to individual, on how they take on it. And yeah, so it's just really, yeah, I think it's just depends on the person. Definitely, that's what I think.
Sorry, I think the point is confused here. Is the point you're making that bhakti doesn't work, or is the point you're making that different people take the bhakti differently?
I think I don't say that the bhakti doesn't work. I think I'd say it really just depends on who you are, and it's just really dependent on individual to individual. As I mentioned earlier, like
what depends on individual to individual?
Like if you're able to do bhakti or not, like if you're able to find the taste or find happiness in doing bhakti, it really depends on the person to person. Like as I said earlier, people can find happiness in other things, or people with autism might not have the same chance or ability to perform devotional service to the same level, or they don't have the interest, they don't have the understanding, the knowledge. So I say what I'm saying is it really is like, you can't just say that, oh, you can only be happy only by devotional service. I think it's unfair, not unfair, but it's like, it really depends on who you are and how you take on it. Like you don't I don't know.
I think you're confusing the efficacy of bhakti with the ability to practice it sustainably.
Sorry, what was that?
You're confusing the efficacy of bhakti with the ability to practice it sustainably. For instance, if a person's not ready to take on bhakti, then it means they won't take the process and they won't think it's compelling because for some reason they think something else is more important. But if they still do it, eventually, and not in a very long time, they will find that this is actually really nice and it's transforming their life in a way that they didn't think would be, as effective as they thought it would be. So the bhakti will still take effect. As far as people being disabled, not able to do bhakti, I just don't think that's true. Like, they do it. There's so many.
I'm not saying they're not able to. Okay. Like, let's say, so how do you begin? Like, let's say that, yeah, you're trying to do bhakti, but like you're not going anywhere. So why keep continuing? Why not take another path? Like, as you're saying, oh, eventually you'll find that it's really helpful, but when is that event, like when is that time going to come?
Literally in 1 month's time. If you're not finding any effect in 1 month's time, then you're doing something wrong and you should get help. Not like from a counselor, I mean like from someone who's helping you. Because like you can say all you want that bhakti is not working, etc. But are you taking into account the different factors that make up the process? I could go to the gym and lift 2 kilo dumbbells and say gymming doesn't work.
And I have another question. Divyansh Prabhu, you said if this process doesn't work, then we can go try on something else. And what else is that something else? And then how does that give a guarantee? Like, first of all, what is that something else? And then how is that guaranteeing anything to you?
It depends on what your passions are, like what you enjoy personally. Like you have to try everything, you know what I mean? I'm not saying, okay, this is just like a very like a vague statement, but like you can do anything else, like spend your time like in what you're passionate about. Like, let's say if you're passionate about cycling, you can spend your time in cycling. That's just an example. But like to the point that Mrugang probably made, that you're doing something wrong, but like so when you're doing devotional service, like what, like even if you're consulting people, like you're having devotees around, but what to say that when you go back home, like obviously you get some realization, but how does that, like that does change you, it does change you like a lot, like on how you think about it. But in long run, like if you're still like very unsure, and like you think that, oh, okay, maybe following the 4 eggs or doing my rounds is not really like everything that I need to do. I want to do more, I want to do different things, that I want to have focus on other things as well, like rather than just doing these activities, because that's not what's like that's not what's completing my life, I guess, in a way.
Okay, so
I'm not saying going, yeah, like this is just from like a perspective, like just one perspective. There's definitely, like, I'm not like discrediting anyone that's like obviously like performing Krishna consciousness, because like a very high level to be in, to be able to focus, to be able to completely give up like material desires. Definitely not. But I feel like it just depends on who you are, and like individually, what if you do still have material desires and you still want to pull through? Like pure devotion means no material desires, and obviously it's a gradual process, so you take baby steps. Obviously you can't just give up all the desires at once. But what if like 20 years down the line, what if I started my Krishna consciousness journey now, but 20 years down the line I still have so many desires that I don't want, that are not related or don't that are running parallel to like Krishna consciousness, that these lines don't meet? Like what if that's the case?
What if that's the case? No, okay, I just want to say something. I want to break away from like the debate sort of constriction. I just want to say that I think we have to understand how to practice bhakti. And one part of that is to understand where you are, right? It's like you can't just suddenly assume that I'm going to completely dedicate myself to a practice of bhakti for which I don't have the qualification, and then expect to see the results that are seen by people who are actually at that level. It's just like saying gymming works, but if I, as a beginner, decide to deadlift 150 kilos and expect to, see the gains that people who are at that level are seeing, then I'm a bit deluded. And that doesn't speak to the efficacy of gymming as a practice, right? It doesn't speak to it. It just means that you're trying to do something you're not qualified for. So the equivalent in bhakti is that you need to understand, all right, who am I? What are my desires? How much bhakti can I do? Where is my position? Understanding your position and then taking the first step and taking the next step in devotional service, you'll find that bhakti is incredibly effective, incredibly powerful. And you're saying in 20 years' time, what will happen? I'm telling you right now, if you make sure to have the association of devotees who are actually fired up in bhakti, in devotional service. Association means you take their impressions, which means not hanging around people who are also, I like watching movies, I like doing this, but people like who are actually dedicated to their practice of bhakti and are nice people that connect with you. You hang around them forget 20 years, hang around them for 6 months. And just that by itself is going to transform you to such a large degree. Like chapter 2 in the Gita says, your desires are transformed by your association. So depending on your association, you're going to have desires as well. So that's one part of it. The other part I've already said, that you need to understand what your position is and then take the next step. The third part is Krishna says in the 7th chapter that after many lifetimes of practice, one understands that everything that I'm looking for is Vasudeva, which means that all of the desires all the things that I'm trying to enjoy, the actual essence of that enjoyment is Krishna himself. So until we're able to see that, we are in Maya. So, we shouldn't expect the highest result when we're just starting. We should know what to expect as a result of bhakti, and that requires a little bit of training as well. There's so many shlokas in the Bhagavad-gītā and in other texts that show what the actual effect of bhakti should be. But if we're saying this is going to fill my heart completely right now, then no, that's not going to happen. And I don't think that speaks to the efficacy of bhakti. It just speaks to where you are and how you're applying that bhakti to your life. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did I say something wrong, Krishna?
I feel like I misspoke, or I probably no, because I didn't mean to say that, oh, you do bhakti and you get results instantly. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the practice takes a long time. You have to obviously spend time, and you have to really, focus. But I'm not saying that it's instant results. Obviously nothing is instant results. But I'm just saying, like, as you said that, oh, right association, but what if I still find like associating with my friends that are not Krishna conscious, but I still find happiness in that? Like obviously, like I want to associate with people that are devotees as well, because I really find happiness in that as well. Like I really find happiness hanging out with all the boys at temple. Like that gives me a lot of joy. But I also do find happiness in hanging out with people that are not Krishna conscious. So like as you said, that you should only associate with devotees for like a period of time, but that gives me a bit of like I wouldn't be satisfied, because I'd still feel that why did I just like abandon like people that are actually close to me as well?
I didn't say only associate with devotees. What I'm saying is that you should take to Krishna consciousness, understanding what your desires and inclinations are. But I also said that the people that you hang around with influence your desires. So if you have friends that are not devotees, but you like being around them, do that. But when you also have association of devotees who are actually advanced, and spending significant time with them, you'll find that it's purifying you internally. And you'll find that you slowly, your desire to hang out with your other friends will go away. It's not like you'll be guilted out of it or you're being forced to stay away from it. That's not actually advancement. You'll find that you naturally lose that desire. Like chapter 2, text 59, Krishna says, when you have the higher taste, you can let go of the lower one. Not give up the lower thing, because that Krishna actually says if you give it up without having lost the taste for it, then you're just a pretender, because your desire to do it will still remain.
And just on that point, just quickly, and then we'll probably have to wrap up. It's even the Q&A session's going on over time now. But just to also make the point, it's when we apply param drishtva nivartate, the higher taste, it's not even saying that it's a higher taste as in the people are a lower taste. It's simply the way of associating with them becomes a higher taste. You don't need to abandon anyone in Krishna consciousness. You simply change the way you relate to them. So it's never, at no point does Krishna consciousness demand you end a friendship. But at one point it will transform the way you relate to other people. And so you can still maintain those relationships consistently throughout your life with people who mean something to you, and that's very well good. And in fact, I'd say it would strengthen those bonds, because I'd say the essential principle about the difference between material and spiritual activities, we can talk about getting happiness from both, but this is a central point of the 9th chapter, that one is permanent and one is not. Those relationships become permanent because they become transformed in the way that you're relating. The actual way that spiritual science, the whole point of spirituality is relationship. It's how do we build meaningful and true relationships in a sense that is much more stable and eternal. That's not to say that your material friendships are bad, right? But it's that they could be so much more. And it doesn't mean that the people are bad, but that they can be related to in different ways where you both are benefiting each other better. Does that make sense? So the higher taste isn't even necessarily the people, it's the way of relating to people. It's the way of relating to the world. And it's doing so in a way that is, again, eternal. That's the point. Like, what is the fruits of all fruit of activity? It's death and rebirth. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. That actually really does help. Thank you so much for that.
Okay, Jai,
I think that actually does answer like part of my question, like where you have to abandon someone. But no, I mean, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Like you don't have to abandon them, but you make better relationships with them because you have the higher taste.
Yeah, you no longer want to relate to them in an exploitative way or in a material way, but it's in a spiritual way. You get deeper relationships. My friendships have only become better because of Krishna consciousness, not worse, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Jai. Well, so a few of you have straddled along. Yeah, I think it's the flu or something. Lots of people who normally don't call in sick have all called in sick, so we had a smaller batch today. It's probably why. So it was a bit harder to keep going, but thank you all for turning up, and thank you for pushing through the smaller cohort feeling. I'll see you all next week, and yeah, have a good week. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you,
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.